this week as I was studying a little bit about churches that are dying or dead, I came across a report by a well-known research company called Lifeway Research. They make a lot of small group materials, even things that we use here at the church. And they talked about how the church in the United States has been declining. But they also talked about how coming out of COVID, a lot of churches swelled up for a time. They got bigger. There was more people were looking for God, looking for their answers back in Scripture. And many churches got larger, but then in the middle to end of 22 and in 2023 in the United States, 54% of churches in our country are in a noticeable decline. They're shrinking, their attendance is going, less people are coming. And see, the problem sometimes happens gradually. It's like a crack in the wall at home. Maybe you look up and you see there's a crack in the corner there, and has that been there all this time, or did that just happen yesterday? But then you get used to the crack, right? Sometimes that happens in a small town, right? Maybe some small towns that you grew up thinking about fondly, and all of a sudden they lose, this restaurant closes, and you say, okay, no big deal. And then the ice cream shop goes, and the beauty parlor goes, and it happens slowly, one after another. That can be the same in the church, where there's decline and there's no life. And instead of things happening in which we're spurned on towards the things of God, it's people that are disgruntled, and one leaves and another leaves. And that's what was happening in Sardis. See, on the outside, men were still impressed with this place, but God says, I see right through you. This church was dead, and they didn't seem to realize it. They needed to diagnose the problem. Some of you will be familiar with the name Tom Rainier. He's a church consultant that's a writer also, but he was a church consultant for many years. He would go into churches all over the country, and he would help them, try to give them assessment, things that were going well, things that weren't going well, and he would give recommendations. And sometimes he would even have to say hard words like, I think you're in trouble here. If you don't change, in the next 2 to 3 years, you could be done. But after he did this church consultant for many, many years, he wrote a book that became wildly popular, I guess you might say, about 10 years ago, and it's called The Autopsy of a Deceased Church. And he identified many fatal causes of what happens to a church when they start out with life, but they kind of are headed the wrong direction. And here's just a few of them. The number one thing he says, when you treat the past as a hero, you treat the past as a hero. If someone suggests change, you want to keep things the way they'd always be. In his book, he says, people are quoted as saying, we would rather die than change. And people aren't holding on to Christian doctrine or theology. Those aren't the things that they're holding on to so tight. It's the other things, the more superficial things. The second thing, he says, when we refuse to adapt to the needs of our community. Again, he says churches that are vibrant, they identify with their community. They want to be intentional. They want to permeate through their community. They want to meet the needs that their community has, but then sometimes over the course of time, the community will change and the church does not. And things that maybe worked 15, 20 years ago, where you'd have big events at the church and people would come, or you'd have tent meetings and revivals, and people from the outside would say, I got to go see what's going on here. He says those things are less and less likely to work in today's world. Another one, he says, is moving the focus of your budget inward. Not spending your budget on missions or on things that enable people to take the gospel to other people, but instead, he says, dying churches often have large sums of money even as they close their doors. They're saving their money. They don't want to make improvements or do different things because they're almost preparing for a bad day. They're preparing for things when less people are coming, even when more people might be coming. A big one, he says, is allowing the Great Commission to become the Great Omission. He means by that is churches can become less concerned with reaching the lost, which should be our primary goal as a church. And we go from go and make disciples to making things all about making our facility, our place, like a country club. Another one, he says, when there's no clear purpose or vision, then instead everyone fights for their own preferences. The last one that I'll share, obsessing over facilities. He said people fight over stained glass, the color of the carpet, the size, the location of the pulpit. He says these aren't the only causes that cause churches to go in the wrong direction, but they are the leading ones in his opinion. Do we recognize that many churches are dying all around us? And I'll say sometimes it's not even the church's fault. Another statistic I read this week, over 25 years, so a longer swath of time, 40 million less Americans are going to church today than 25 years ago. So 1998, 40 million more people in the United States were attending church on Sundays than today. And this one I thought was particularly interesting. In 2020, it was the first year that they had statistics in which more people were now staying home on a Sunday than going to church. That more people, it went to about 51 to 52% stay at home. So that means here in Fairbury, we have a town of approximately 4,000 people. That means we have 2,000 people probably in our area that don't go anywhere to church on a Sunday. Church, we have a mission field right here where we live.